Creo Parametric 8.0 has a number of enhancements and improvements to the user interface and the user experience. The first one that you'll notice is that datum planes by default are shaded now. Also, our coordinate systems appear with a red, green, and blue appearance. If you don't want to see the datum planes being filled, if you go to your datum display control in the in-graphics toolbar, there is a checkbox where you can disable that and then re-enable it if you want to. Also, there are a few other places where we have controls for these. If we go to File, Options, and then to our system appearance, we can expand the datum group underneath global colors. Here is a checkbox for the RGB colored axes. Also, if we go to our entity display, down here we have display 3D datum planes, show datum planes with a color fill, and a fill transparency. These have corresponding config.pro options, and I will show those later on. Let's cancel out of here. The next thing I will show is creating a sketch and some of the changes in there. So I will click on the sketch button to go into sketch mode. I will just grab a shape from the palette. Let me go to profiles, and I'll just grab an eye shape and just drop it in here. And then let's close out of there, and I'll just hit the check mark over here. And let's zoom in, and I'm going to turn off the display of my datums now since I do not need them. So you can see that we have an improved appearance to our different constraints. They appear in a little circle, and they have a background color. Also, with the different dimensions on here, if I drag the dimensions over into the shaded area, you can see that they appear with a background as well. To access the controls for these, you can go to File, Options, and then we'll go back to our entity display. If I scroll down in the list here, we see a bunch of different options for dimensions, annotations, notes, and reference designators. And you can see that we have a dimension background. You have a drop-down list where you can control where the dimension background appears. Also, you have controls over the colors and the transparencies. If I scroll down even further in this list, we have our constraint display settings where we can control the size and the background color and the line color. Now, for a number of these different controls, you do not have a corresponding config.pro option. Just remember, anything that you have in here that does not have a config.pro option will automatically be stored in your .ui customization file when you click the OK button. All right, let's cancel out of here since I didn't actually change anything. Another control that you have in sketch mode, if you go to the setup drop-down menu, here we have show, and you have the ability to control the display of weak dimensions. So for example, I just turned off the display of weak dimensions. Hey, let's go back and turn their display back on. Also, from that setup show command, this is another location where you can toggle the display of a dimension background if you do not want to see it. But let's turn that back on. You might have noticed that, again, the dimension that I had overlapping onto our shaded background, that one now appears with the background appearance in order to be more easily read. All right, let's hit the check mark to finish out of this one. And now with that sketch selected, I'm going to hit the extrude tool. And I just want to show you that the dashboards have been updated, so the icons are made a little bit more prominent in here. Also, you'll notice when I went in here, the placement tab was automatically open. And that's another setting that you have automatically where the most likely panel that you're going to interface with is going to be opened by default when you go inside of a tool. Also, as I brought the model tree back, you'll notice that the location of the tabs in the panel itself moved over. So you'll no longer have that overlapping between the panels and your model tree. Let's cancel out of here. I'm going to switch over to a sheet metal part, and let's create a flange wall. So I'll click on the icon. I'll just pick an edge over here and you can see the flange. So we have the placement tab. You can grab any of these panels and move them around or lock them into different parts of the interface. Let me move this back one over here. Or if you just click on this particular button, it will attach it to the dashboard back in its original location. And one thing that's also helpful is that you could have multiple different tabs open at the same time. So for example, here I've got the miter cuts, and especially in sheet metal when you're trying to control a number of different things, hey, have as many panels open as you want in here. And you can leave those in there, and then when you are done, you can close out of here. If you move these different panels off, let me hit the check mark, and then go to create another one of those features, you'll notice that those panels retain their previous position and whether they were opened. So that is another change that you'll see to your dashboards. Along those same lines, let me go back over to that standard part model that I was using. Let's again just extrude this some depth and hit the check mark and take a look at another example of an updated dashboard. So for example, if I go to create a hole, let me close the shape tab. I previously had that one open. You can see that the way that the different icons appear on the ribbon are, again, a little more prominent, a little bit different organization than you had in Creo 7.0 and earlier. Let's cancel out of that one. And the next enhancement that we will take a look at, let me switch to a different part. Let's grab a part that has some inheritance in it. So here I have a part, and there is the external inheritance feature down at the bottom of the model tree. Now, I'm not a person who notices icons. Be aware that when you have these icons with a plus sign on them, it indicates that something actually has been varied in the feature. Let me select the inheritance feature and then use edit definition from the mini toolbar. If I go to the options tab and then varied items, well, a little change that they made to varied items is that you'll have in parentheses the number of different items that were varied, and on the different tabs, it tells you what was varied. And it's a little time savings improvement because in Creo 7.0 and earlier, if you did have varied items, sometimes you would have to just click on the different tabs and see, oh, well, something changed over here. Whereas now I know exactly what has been varied. I can go right to the tabs with that information. Let's get out of here and take a look at the same thing for a part that has flexibility. So I've got this spring. If I go to my model properties, again, that's an icon that I have in my quick access toolbar. Then down here we have flexibility, and we can see that it is defined. If I click the change button, here in the flexibility dialog box, I can see which tabs have something flexible defined. We know that the dimensions, there's one dimension that is flexible. Also from the parameters tab, one of the parameters is flexible as well. All right, let's close out of there. The next thing that we'll take a look at, let me jump over to a model with a bunch of surfaces. And first off, if you take a look at the model tree, there is now a design items folder. Here I can collapse it and expand it. And in your design items folder, you will have your quilts and your different bodies. If you go to the settings button, you now have the ability to display the design tree as its own separate tree. You can see it is to the right of the model tree. And again, we can see all our different quilts inside of here. We can see our different bodies. You will notice that the design tree has its own separate search and filter as well. So you can search independently in the model tree and in the design tree when you have displayed in its own separate window. Let me go to my settings for the tree filters. A few things that I want to point out. First off, if you go to the body quilt tab, you have the ability to display consumed bodies and consumed quilts in here as well. Another control that you have is the ability to display custom groups in your design tree. Let me close out of there after hitting the OK button. So now if I right click on the top node, I can create a custom group. And here we have the custom group. And I'm going to rename this. Maybe I'm going to call this one the fuselage and hit the enter key. And then I can grab different quilts and I can see, okay, here's the quilt. And let's grab it and drag it to be located in here. So that is a way of getting some additional organization. Similarly, I can create a custom group. Let's rename this one and I'm going to call it wings. And then if I right click, I can create a custom group within the custom group. And then I can say, hey, let's make this one the starboard wing. And then I can create another group and make this one the port side wing. And that way I can have additional organization and controls in there. So for example, here we have this quilt. Well, let's grab this quilt and drag it. This is from the port side, so it should be in there. And then I've got this quilt. Hey, let's grab this one and drag it in there and add other additional items in here as necessary to organize the different quilts and bodies in the model. And one of the reasons that we have this new design items folder and design tree is so that you can organize the model differently than using local groups in the model tree, because with local groups, that's dependent on the order of the features in here. Well, with the design items, you can organize these independently of the regeneration order in the particular model. Another thing to point out about the user interface, take a look at the editing group here in the ribbon. Now, you might not notice this, but in previous versions, in Creo 7 and earlier, most of these icons were grayed out until you had something selected. Back when Wildfire 1.0 came out, back in 2003, there was this concept of having two different workflows. You had the action object workflow or the object action workflow. I know, kind of weird. The basic difference between them is that you can invoke a command first and then do something to an entity in your model. Alternatively, with the commands that are object action, you have to select something first and then the commands become available. And yeah, that can be confusing, especially for newer users who don't understand the difference. For that reason, now most of these commands here are available from the get-go. Also, I want to show you some of the differences in the interface for these commands. First one that we'll take a look at, when you click on the trim command now, you have the ability to specify the type when you are creating the initial feature. So back before, the type of the feature was dependent on the inputs that you gave it, but now you can invoke the command first and specify whether this is supposed to be for trimming a curve or trimming a quilt. Similarly, let me go to the intersect command. So the intersect command can be used to intersect surfaces or intersect sketches. Choose that from the beginning. And also the offset command. I did like 5 videos on the offset command. Here you can see where you can specify if it's going to offset a surface or you're going to offset a curve or create an offset quilt boundary chain. So let's cancel out of that one. Another thing to take a look at, if I go to the View tab, now we have a drop down that allows us quick access to the control of different appearances in the model. So for example, here we have solid bodies. We can toggle the transparency of solid bodies in the model. Only bodies that are flagged as transparent are affected. Select a body and click Make Transparent command to flag it. Also, we have our quilts. Here we have a transparency control with a slider and also controls for toggling the transparency of all tessellated geometry in the model. So for example, something that you might have brought over in an STL file. And the last thing to take a look at in this particular model, let's say I want to create a published geometry feature. If I take a look in the model, we can see that the last two features are published geometry features. There are a few other published geometry features in the part. This was created back in the day. Now when I create a published geometry feature, let me use the control key to select a couple different surfaces. Let me go to the properties tab and I'll call this, I just like to call them PG for published geometry. I'll call this wings. Now when I hit the check mark, if you take a look down at the bottom, published geometry features are created in the footer of the model by default. One other thing to mention about the design items, here I have a body merge feature. In another video, I showed how you can use patterns of different references in your Boolean operations. Now, I'm going to cancel out of here. I just want to show you that if I expand bodies, well, then we have the consumed bodies appearing in here as well in a different color. If I go to my tree filters once again and then change to body quilt, by default, these are turned off, consumed bodies and consumed quilts. So if I click OK at this point, we only have one body listed in the model. But once again, if I go back to my tree filters and then go to body quilt, I can have both consumed bodies and consumed quilts appear in the design tree as well. Let's take a look at a UI enhancement in assembly mode. Let's say I go to assemble a component. Let me grab the turret. Okay, so I want to assemble this turret in here. Let me just start positioning it into place a little bit the way that I want it to be. Again, this is the same as in previous versions, but you'll notice that the display of the dashboard has been updated, so we can see that it's a little more prominent in terms of what the different icons mean because they have text explaining them. Here we have our connection type, current constraint listed. Here we can see that for our component display, it tells us what the icons mean for displaying them in the same window or a separate window. And that way, it's a little easier to understand. Where you'll also see a difference is the status. So right now it tells us that we have no constraints. Let me grab some geometry. So for example, I'll grab that cylindrical surface and this cylindrical surface. So now it tells us that we are partially constrained. Let me select a flat surface. Might be easier if I pick the other one from this window. And right now it says, oh, wait, the constraints are invalid. For some reason, it wanted to give a normal constraint. Let's try a coincident constraint. And now we are fully constrained using assumptions. If I uncheck the allow assumptions, it tells us once again that we are partially constrained. And again, if I try to give an impossible constraint, like, hey, let's grab these two surfaces and make them coincident, you can see that it promptly tells us that the constraints are invalid. Hey, let's delete that one out of there. Let's turn allow assumptions back on. And so now we are fully constrained using assumptions. And now that we are fully constrained using assumptions, let's hit the check mark. So again, just a little bit more information in terms of your constraint status and also an updated dashboard to make it easier to understand. Let's take a look at some different config options. I will go to File, Options. And again, now there's an additional options command because you have the ability to manage UI customization right from a single dialog box. Let's cancel out of here and go back to File, Options, Options. And so for some of the different options, let me go to Configuration Editor. I will hit the Find button and let's search for 3D_datum and then click on Find Now. So if I make this dialog box a little bit bigger, you can see that we have two new options: 3D datum display fill set to show or hide for the 3D datum's transparent fill. Also, we have the 3D datum planes transparency control, where you can set a value for the transparency percentage. So those two options are new. Let me change in here to, let's look up a different one, enable legacy. So we have enabled legacy datum planes, and this one enables the legacy look and feel for datum planes. Default value is no, but you could change that to yes if you're attached to the old way that they looked. Also, if I look up CSIS, we now have the CSIS color RGB, which you can change between yes or no for the red, green, blue display of the coordinate systems. For those different options, as I mentioned earlier, for things like your constraint display or dimension display, if they don't have a config.pro option, when you change those settings, they are stored in your Creo Parametric customization.ui file automatically. Let's close. Oh, actually, let me stay in here because I want to show you that there are a few options now for better control of multiple monitors. So here we have primary monitor, and you can use this to control the number of the display to treat as the primary monitor on which to launch Creo, overriding the setting in use on the desktop. Another one that we have, let me search on the term DPI for a couple of the new options. There's one called DPI scale, the custom display scaling size to be used to scale GUI elements and controls, overriding the setting in use on the dashboard. Also, another one is high DPI text enabled. That is another new option. And another option that is related to your use of multiple monitors, there's a hidden config.pro option. It's called text_height_factor. You could use that as well if, for example, you might have some vision issues. If you want to make the text bigger in the graphics area, that config.pro option will enable you to do that. So there you have it, a number of enhancements to the user interface and user experience in Creo Parametric 8.0. I hope you enjoyed this video. For more information, please visit www.creowindshield.com. If you learned something from this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this video, please click the subscribe button and ring the bell to be informed when new videos are uploaded. Thank you very much.